This is Glass City Humanist, a show about humanism, humanist values, by a humanist. Here is your host, Douglas Berger.
In this episode, our guest is Marcee Lichtenwald, who happens to be a member of the Secular Humanists of Western Lake Erie. She is a volunteer patient escort with the Toledo Abortion Center, which is the last abortion clinic in Northwest Ohio, and she volunteers with the Agnes Reynolds Jackson Fund, which helps fund abortions for those not able to afford them. We talk about the Post Roe landscape for reproductive rights, her time as a patient escort, and what we can do to support abortion rights.
Glass City Humanist is an outreach project of the Secular Humanists of Western Lake Erie, building community through compassion and reason for a better tomorrow.
Thank you for joining us today, and we are speaking with Marcee Lichtenwald, who happens to be a member of SHoWLE. She is a volunteer patient escort with the Toledo Abortion Center, which is the last abortion clinic in Northwest Ohio, and she volunteers with the Agnes Reynolds Jackson Fund, which helps fund abortions for those not able to afford them. Thank you for joining us today, Marcee.
Thank you for having me.
Can you briefly tell us what happened to abortion rights when the U.S. Supreme Court handed down their Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health decision on June 24th?
Oh, gosh. Completely. The key word is right. The key word is our rights. We completely lost our rights is what happened. And we've seen in Ohio, many states, there were like 13 states with, trigger bans. So, I think at least 10 of those, don't quote me on that, but I know the number is right in that range. Completely outright banned abortion as soon as Roe fell. Ohio had an injunction on a 6-week ban that Governor DeWine signed, I want to say back in 2019. But of course, there was an injunction on that. It was, found to be unconstitutional, so it hadn't quite passed. It was still being held up in the courts, and we figured we would have time. As soon as Roe, we all knew that this was going to happen, but, it was still a blow nonetheless. But we figured we would have time before Ohio was able to actually implement anything. And so we were really taken by surprise when a judge lifted the injunction the very same day. Since when do these legislators work past 5 p.m.? And at 6 o'clock, we got the news. So that literally effective the very following day, Saturday, which is typically abortion clinics, busiest days, because that's when people have the most availability to be able to make doctor's appointments when, clinics are actually available on those days. So effective immediately, appointments were canceled at clinics all across the state. Our clinic here in Toledo actually only does medical abortions, which is the pill, which is only good for up to 9 weeks and 6 days. That's an FDA regulation. However, the 6-week ban really put a damper on that, because obviously if there is any detection of fetal cardiac activity whatsoever, they cannot prescribe that pill. We have to send them over to Michigan.
But let's be clear, the cardiac indication is not a heart beating, correct?
Correct. There is no heart at 6 weeks. It's basically just, I am not a medical person, so I can't speak to, medical terminology nor, the functionality of it all, but there is no heart in place. Basically, the system is being put in place. So it's fetal cardiac activity. It's just like basically a fetal cardiac pull. It's just a register. It's not an actual heart. The word heartbeat is a sensationalist term. It's designed specifically to give personhood to an embryo. They're trying to apply personhood to this embryo, which is more than just emotive language. This later helps determine personhood laws for embryos and fetuses, to which once you apply personhood to an embryo or fetus, suddenly that personhood of that embryo or fetus supersedes the personhood of the person who is pregnant.
And you mentioned about the dissolving of the injunction against the heartbeat bill. So before that was dissolved, was it the full 20 weeks that somebody could get an abortion in Ohio, or?
According to Ohio law, you could get an abortion up to 20 weeks. That's 20 weeks gestation, which is basically around 22 weeks, from the first day of your last period. Like, it's a whole thing how they figure all that out, but it basically equates to about 20 weeks gestation period. However, it was very limited, which clinics could actually perform abortions up to 20 weeks, because that's a skill that, not all doctors can perform, a 20-week abortion. So the majority of the very few clinics that Ohio already had actually couldn't perform abortions all the way up to 20 weeks. So it was on the books, but it wasn't really in practice at every clinic because they didn't have the capabilities of performing abortions that far. So, like, Toledo Abortion Center, it used to be Capital Care, only does medical, and that's, up to 9 weeks and 6 days. There's another clinic that only does medical. There were a couple other ones that would do them up to like 16, 17 weeks, depending. So it really depends on the clinic, which is also the case with these folks that now have to cross state lines to obtain abortion care. I mean, we're lucky enough that we're on the Michigan border. We can send patients to Detroit, but that's also very specific to what their gestation is and which clinic they can even go to, depending on what services those clinics can provide.
Now, technically, we do have the 6-week ban now, and that is in state court now. They just filed a lawsuit last week or the week before, challenging it based on the Ohio Constitution. If for whatever reason that doesn't work out, what can we expect to happen as we move forward here in Ohio in a post-Roe world?
Well, the Ohio Supreme Court already refused to hear that case, so it was shut down before it was even argued. So they just completely shut down any argument that we have against that. So that just kind of, I know it's not done, and I don't know where they're at with it right now, but that was a huge blow when the Ohio Supreme Court, and this was, what's that, last Friday?
Yeah, something like that.
Time means nothing. Yeah. So that was a pretty huge blow, and it didn't really look very good for us. I mean, there are representatives that are definitely going to try for an all-out ban. I mean, we do have an SB 8 Texas style ban on the table. It's already been introduced. So they're definitely going to try to move forward with that. I can't speak to whether or not they'll be able to move forward with it. I guess we'll see how the primaries go. And they're specifically waiting until after the primaries to move that forward.
Yeah, and I think too, one of the major arguments that they often use is that they consider a fetus a child, and that taking the fetus out before it's born is murder. Do you have any suggestions about how we can get around that? Or,
well, I think it's important to understand that is it's an extreme Christian right view. And so what they're essentially doing is forcing a very specific religious ideology onto the public, which completely goes against our First Amendment. There are plenty of other religions out there that do not share that same view regarding embryos and fetuses. I personally am an atheist humanist. That's why I'm part of Secular Humanists of Northwest Ohio. They don't have any right to force that worldview onto me. There is absolutely no consensus within the scientific community on when life actually, begins, as far as how you define life, whether it begins at conception, whether it begins at that first breath once the fetus is born. I mean, that is very, very subjective based on, your religion, your non-religion, or whatever. So no one specific religious, especially this extreme right religious ideology that is being forced upon us. I mean, we've got legislators that are creating laws based on an extreme Christian view.
And what can people do if they are upset by what has happened? How can they get involved?
Well, that's a really good question. So we're actually working on some things here in Toledo. We're going to hold some events. We're hoping to kind of start holding regular events to kind of help educate the public on different things that they can do. And it really kind of depends on the person. what they're capable of doing, what they're willing to do, what skills that they have, whether that's, taking direct action, whether that's letter writing campaigns, whether that's, whether you're the person that, wants to pressure, your local politicians and your state politicians. I think everyone has their own unique set of skills that they can utilize. There's really no one thing that you have to do to make things happen. There's really a variety of things that multiple people can do. Talking about abortion openly, saying the word, there are a lot of people out there that talk about their abortions openly as a means of normalizing abortion and making people, allowing people to understand that it's very, very nuanced. It's very, very individual. And it's also very personal. Everyone's reason is different. But then somebody else probably doesn't want to share their personal story, but they do want to talk about abortion openly as if it's a normal part of reproductive care. Having those conversations with your friends and with your family, however you choose to do that. There's really just a variety of things that people can do to speak more openly about abortion, show their support for reproductive justice and reproductive rights, and really work to end the shame and stigma that surrounds abortion and really crush this religious narrative that is forced onto us and is literally controlling our lives, as we just saw happen with the fall of Roe.
And as I mentioned in the intro for you, that you're a volunteer patient escort at the Toledo Abortion Center. Why does the clinic need patient escorts?
So, obviously this starts on the sidewalk. This starts outside of these clinics. So we have what we call in the repro world antis, and we're referring to, these anti-abortion religious zealots, these religious extremists that stand outside of clinics and harass people that are pulling into the clinic. Imagine going to the dentist and there's a bunch of people on the sidewalk screaming and hollering to you, that you're a murderer for pulling out your teeth, or, something ridiculous. Abortion is safer than a root canal. Than having a tooth pulled. It's really one of the safest procedures out there. It's safer than a colonoscopy. But you've got these religious extremists with this really twisted and demented view on abortion and what it is and why people are having it. They literally create people's stories for them. They act like they are the authority on why folks are walking in. They think people are being forced into that clinic. They're coming in against their will. They don't know what their options are. And they're there to give you options, because that's what you need when you go to a doctor's appointment, is some weird stranger on the sidewalk saying, I can save you. It's just really, but for the most part at our particular clinic, we're somewhat lucky that our aunties are a little on the milder side. But they still scare the crap out of our patients. Just because, some, little old lady grandma, is out there saying, I can help you, doesn't mean she isn't terrifying a patient. A friend of mine who escorts there, had one of the workers inside the clinic call her on her cell phone, knowing she was out there, saying there's a patient trapped in her car and she's terrified to get out because someone is standing behind her car yelling at her and won't leave. And it was like the 60, 70-year-old woman, but it still was terrifying to this patient. It's intrusive on your privacy. It's intrusive on, your personal space. People don't need to be accosted when they go to a doctor's office. I've escorted at other clinics where, oh my gosh, the things that these aunties scream and holler is just some of the most hateful, disgusting rhetoric I've ever heard come out of another person's mouth. And it is just absolutely unreal that the general public associates themselves with these people when they adopt these anti-abortion sentiments and the anti-abortion narratives and these shame and stigma narratives and language. They're really aligning themselves with these horrible people. And it starts there, and these are the folks that, these are very organized groups of people who are then lobbying our legislators. They are writing the laws. They are writing the speeches. They are putting politicians, they're getting people elected. They are putting people in our state houses. They have a really, really strong effect. It doesn't begin nor end on that sidewalk.
Right. And it also doesn't begin or end with the patients either. There's been doctors that have been harassed and clinic workers who have been harassed I know that
Absolutely.
there's been stories of abortion doctors having to ride in an armored car
Yeah.
with bulletproof vests on and not giving what their schedule was because people had given lists out of doctors to kill.
They do. They find out where these doctors live. They dox them in their neighborhoods. They post wanted posters throughout their neighborhoods saying wanted for murder. And, sometimes the general public, they just don't really understand what these people are actually saying. They just see wanted for murder and they're like, oh my God. Then there are other ones that are like, oh, do this, it's ridiculous. I know that, I know this person. They're great. We had a barbecue last weekend, but it's really dangerous. I mean, they've been known to, stalk and harass clinic workers, and it's led to actual murder of doctors. Unfortunately, I think there's been a total of 11 doctors over the course of the last 30 years, that have been murdered by these anti-abortion zealots. But to go back to your original question, I remember I realized I didn't fully answer it. So our purpose as escorts, sorry about that. I told you when we started this, right. I'm a rambler, so
you got to give me attention. You're fine.
But no, so our main goal as escorts is we're there to create a barrier between those people on the sidewalk and the patients. We do what we can to, we walk them to the door, we comfort them. We just give them something like, hey, just kind of walk them to the door. And, we use umbrellas to kind of block out, the people on the sidewalk, and also give them a sense of privacy as they're walking to the door, make them feel like they have a sense of privacy walking to the door, and just to make them feel safer, as they're pulling, because they have to pull in through these people that are screaming and yelling at them. So, to see a smiling face and hey, I'd be more than happy to, walk the door with you and just kind of soften, what's going on that sidewalk, just ignore them a little bit. And we just kind of keep talking as we're walking them to the door, just to kind of keep their focus off the folks on the sidewalk that are just being absolutely horrible, and try to make their experience a little bit better as they're walking in.
Yeah. And that's why I thought it was very ironic and telling when Attorney General Yost fell over himself to respond to a supposed or suspected bombing of an anti-abortion group's office in Wisconsin with a letter to the Department of Justice saying, hey, you better look into this. And people are getting harassed at clinics, and doctors are getting harassed. Nothing, just crickets.
Yeah, absolutely. We always say, we don't call the cops. We have a general rule at Toledo Women's Center that we don't call the cops on the folks on the sidewalk unless there is a direct threat to our lives. Like if there was something like a bomb threat, or if there was a clinic invasion, that's a different story. If we're talking about a direct threat to us or patients. But as far as, other things, we don't call the cops, because historically speaking, the law enforcement is not generally on our side. Now, we are lucky enough with, the Toledo Police Department. They have been there, for us, in certain instances. So it's not as bad here as it has been in other regions. But we still don't get as much support from law enforcement as say a crisis pregnancy center or a church. God forbid you vandalize a church, the cops will definitely hunt you down and find you. I mean, our clinic has been vandalized numerous times over the years. There was an arson just last December. So I mean, and they've never caught the people, and there was several reasons to that. It's kind of hard to catch folks that do these things. But at the same time, I mean, we always say, well, because abortion, we just don't get the same respect that, other businesses are going to get. If someone's outside another doctor's office, non-abortion related doctor's office, harassing them, the cops would make them go away. They wouldn't be like, oh, free speech. Or if they were outside, a store or anybody else's personal area, property, they would allow it to happen. But because abortion, free speech, and we've seen several instances in other areas too, where cops actually join the antis on the sidewalk, pray with them, say, oh, I agree with what you're doing. I'm on the clock, so I can't really say much, but so.
Now I know the patient escorts locally have been very active on the political front, including getting involved with trying to get the Toledo Abortion Center a transfer agreement with Toledo Hospital back when they were trying to subscribe to that one of those trap laws that they had, that the state had.
Yeah.
Have many of the escorts have personal abortion experiences?
I can't speak to their personal experiences. Yeah, I really don't know. I mean, that's personal to each and every individual, and I definitely can't speak about somebody else's experience. You know, only they can speak for themselves. So.
Can someone who doesn't have a personal experience, can they be a good advocate for patients as a
Oh,
patient escort?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, honestly, I mean, any single person with a uterus is affected by these abortion laws. Anybody who's capable of getting pregnant is affected by these abortion laws. I mean, you know, abortion isn't just an unwanted pregnancy. Abortion is healthcare. You know, abortion is not just an I should say unplanned pregnancy, not unwanted, because, you know, that's still stigmatizing language, you know, but unplanned, you know, we all have the right to choose when and if we want to parent. But even, you know, in a wanted pregnancy, abortion is healthcare. You know, pregnancy is not safe. Pregnancy can kill you. You know, pregnancy comes with a series of complications. Abortion has to be accessible when things get really, really scary, when things go bad. It's the life of the pregnant person depends on that. You know, their future ability to reproduce, to go on, to have children depends on having access to abortion. You know, miscarriages, you know, pregnancies that go wrong. I mean, that could seriously inhibit someone's fertility, future fertility.
Do you like what you hear? Would you like to support the show so we can make it better? You can write a review for podcast apps that allow reviews. You can share our website, glasscityhumanist.show, with your friends, and you can donate to the show using the donate link on the website. Any support is appreciated.
And you are also involved with the Agnes Reynolds Jackson Fund.
Yes.
Could you tell us a little bit about that and what its mission is?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Agnes Reynolds Jackson Fund, the Aggie Fund for short, is Toledo's local abortion fund. We've been around since the early 90s. We've always been really small and local. So it's always been a really small fund. We just basically took care of the local clinic, which was Center for Choice, up until 2013, which unfortunately shut down. But then additionally, Capital Care, which is now Toledo Women's Center. So basically, what the Agnes Reynolds Jackson Fund has always done is just kind of picked up that little bit of extra cash that patients can't cover out of pocket. There are other larger funds, you know, like the National Abortion Federation and Ohio's statewide fund, Women Have Options Ohio. So it's kind of a trickle down effect where, you know, it starts with those funds. They have certain allotted amounts that they cover for procedures. And then patients are responsible for the rest of the out of pocket expenses, because obviously most insurances don't cover abortion and Medicaid doesn't cover it at all because of the Hyde Amendment. So the Aggie Fund existed to kind of help pick up those added costs, because that's a hefty cost for especially, you know, a low income person. We've grown substantially over the last 3 years. So back in 2019, we actually expanded into Michigan after Toledo Women's Center was no longer doing procedural abortions, just the medical abortions. That meant a lot of patients had to then go into Michigan or wherever else to be able to obtain their procedural abortions. So we started supporting Northland Family Planning up there in Detroit, and so we were able to expand there. And we've just had a really good couple of years. We have a really, really great community. Aggie is 100% volunteer based. We are 100% individual donation based. So we don't have a fiduciary sponsor. We don't rely on endowments. They're 100% individual donation. So it's completely and totally community led. I mean, it's the epitome of mutual aid, which is what we think abortion funds are. So 99.9% of what you give to Aggie goes towards abortion care. And that's predominantly the cost of abortion, but it can also include rides to, you know, some people have transportation issues. Gas right now is absolutely astronomical. It's very hard to drive an hour to and from into Michigan on these gas prices. That's a hefty cost. These appointments can take all day long. People might need to get some lunch afterwards. You know, that's gift cards to, you know, McDonald's or Starbucks or, you know, wherever you might be able to drive through and grab a bite or a coffee or something. With the current climate we're in and people having to go across state lines, depending on where they're going, this might even include an overnight stay, because other states still have TREP laws in place, which means 24-hour waiting period or a 48-hour waiting period between appointments. Some states even have 72-hour waiting periods. So you can't exactly drive back and forth between those appointments. So you might need an overnight stay. So we haven't gone that far with it, but we definitely exist to assist all those added costs as well. We're connected with Midwest Access Coalition, which is a practical care fund. They help with all those added costs outside of just the cost of abortion. So.
Yeah, and I will make sure that the link to the Aggie Fund and other links are put up on the show notes. So
Yeah,
we'll make sure
I'll send you our link tree. We just created a link tree. So it's got
okay.
a bevy of resources on there. It'll pretty much
Yeah,
you can pretty much have access to just about every resource we can think of for this area right now. So.
And I've noticed in the past week that there have been some new ad hoc groups holding protests around town here in Toledo.
Yeah.
If someone hears about a protest on social media or by word of mouth, what should people be aware of when they get involved?
I think people should really know who the organizer is. And that doesn't mean, know who they are personally. I mean, that's an added bonus if, if you know that if it's someone that's obviously done protests around the city, that they're an activist within the city, that's always an added bonus. But with these newcomers, ask a lot of questions. And if they aren't answering your questions, this is probably not somebody that you want to trust and that you want to engage in protest with. Because if they're not being upfront about what their objectives are, what permissions they do or don't have, you're taking a pretty huge risk. I mean, some people want to just get out and have their voices heard. They don't want to get arrested. They don't. Some people do, and that's totally great. But some people don't. So people need to go into these situations with all the information. Informed consent is absolutely everything, and people need to be able to make decisions that are best for themselves and their own family lives. Hefty fines might be pretty difficult for someone. You don't want a chance getting your car towed. You don't want a chance a hefty fine from the police. You don't want a chance arrest. If you want a chance all those things, that's completely 100% up to you, but you need to have all the information to make those decisions for yourself. So protest is great. It's about community building and meeting others and, meeting other people that feel as strongly as you do about these issues. But there's also a lot of risk involved. And so you need to make sure that you can trust your organizer and that they're they're organizing responsibly and putting together, if people want to be vigilantes, they can be vigilantes, but they have to be upfront about being vigilantes. If they want to be a radical, but be upfront about being a radical. Don't just expect people to blindly follow you and then let them take the fall for any mishaps that might happen along the way. They have to know that that's a possibility going in.
All right. And I noticed that one of these new ad hoc groups protested a local church this weekend, which I find intriguing. Mm-hmm. I think if religious people protest at clinics, then supporters of abortion rights should protest at churches who are anti-abortion. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
Yeah, I actually really agree with you. And I've engaged in protests outside of churches for that very reason. But again, it has to be done. It has to be done well. So know your organizer and trust your organizer. The FACE Act, which is freedom of access to clinic entrances. It was something Bill Clinton passed back in the 90s in response to like the heavy civil disobedience that was going on outside of abortion clinics. People were, invading clinics. They were chaining themselves. They were blocking doors, keeping patients from being able to go inside. So the FACE Act was created to stop that from happening. So you could actually bring federal charges against people for blocking these entrances. I think it's very important for people to understand that this also applies to churches because, little side note, the only way that they could pass the FACE Act was if they included churches. So because so many people were blocking entrances to churches, they had to include churches in that. But so what people need to understand is if you are protesting outside of churches, there is always a potential for a felony charge. So people need to know ahead of time what they're getting themselves into if they're going to be outside of these churches. So if there is no public property for you to be on, that's a huge indicator that you might be chancing a felony charge. If there is nowhere for you to park, and on a lesser angle, if there's nowhere for you to park your car, you're chancing fines, your car, being towed, the church, if you're going to park on private property, you can't do that. Again, if people want to be vigilantes, that's 100% up to them, but they have to have all the facts and make those decisions for themselves. They have to know the risks.
And one of the major downsides to the Dobbs ruling is it really puts the right to privacy in danger for everyone.
Mhm.
Should we point that out to help build coalitions to help change the law? Or
Yeah.
should we stay focused on the effect on people with uteruses?
Oh gosh, no. It's going to affect everything, and I think Clarence Thomas even kind of laid that out for us. I mean, they're not going to. It didn't start with Roe, and it's not going to end with Roe. Roe is a major, major blow because Roe was decided based on the right to privacy. But people, like I mentioned earlier, this is also religious ideology being forced onto us. They completely. They completely disregarded the First Amendment in this ruling because we have a right to freedom of, which also means from religion. So what they're doing is they're basing these decisions because of religious ideology that they are actually forcing onto communities, that they're forcing onto the people. Laws are going to be created. Our own state judges are going to rule on cases based on historical tradition. That language has already been taken out of Alito's decision. What defines historic tradition? I mean, we could probably do a whole other podcast on the historical tradition of this country. So yeah, it definitely isn't about people with uteruses when it comes to this decision. It affects people with uteruses directly. That decision does, but this is going to lead to all sorts of rights being taken away from us, and we're already seeing it happen. I mean, this opens so many doors. It's utterly terrifying, and people need to be terrified. They need to they need to act, and they need to listen up, and they need to realize what just happened.
Yeah, and the Dobbs decision was a monumental retraction of rights for women. And there have been some forceful words coming from women about how men get involved in supporting abortion rights. So how can someone like me be supportive and get involved without stepping over that line?
I think the best thing is to make sure that people with uteruses are at the forefront. And we really, really, and I'm going to say we have to absolutely center Black and Indigenous people of color. These are the most affected people, by these abortion bans. Abortion bans are classist, they are racist, and Black Indigenous people of color are going to be the most heavily affected. So we have to look for Black leadership and, leadership of women of color, people of color within these circumstances. When it comes to white cis men, and I am going to say white cis men because unfortunately you are the most protected class. Well, I guess white women are probably the most protected class, but you have the most amount of privilege within this country. So you got to be supportive, but kind of also sit on the sidelines. Don't be the loudest person at the protest. Don't be the one organizing the protests. Because that's not your space. We want your allyship, and we want you to have conversations with other men. Have those conversations with your friends. Don't laugh at the jokes. Don't engage in those jokes. Stop and say, hey, you want to know what? This is the type of thing that leads to violence against women. This is the type of thing that leads to a country that is controlling, women's lives and, people with uteruses lives. And, you just have to really examine things that you too have internalized. Recognize that in yourself, and kind of break those down. But when it comes down to it, we need you there, but don't center yourself in those conversations. Don't, even as an ally, don't engage in not all men rhetoric, because again, when you do that, you're centering yourself, because it is all men, it really is, because we all have our own internalized things that we've taken in because of our privileges. So you have to recognize that, and you have to have those conversations with people, but don't center yourself.
Okay, and as we wrap up today, what I like to do is I like to give our guests an opportunity to maybe restate any points that they made during our conversation, or promote a project or event coming up, and how we can get involved, that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess for promotion, so Abortion Access Front, who is this, really amazing organization. They're based out of New York. They're going to be doing a boot camp day, Operation Save Abortion, on July 17th. So you can actually find Abortion Access Front on all the socials. Check them out on YouTube, Feminist Buzzkill. They are going to be live that day. I can't tell you a whole lot about what all they're going to be doing, but it's just going to be kind of like this whole activist boot camp that's going to kind of help you, find out how you can get involved within your community, the different things that you might be able to do. So check them out on their socials, find out more about that, see how maybe you can get involved. We're trying to have an event here in Toledo. Unfortunately, the last almost 2 weeks has been really, really crazy with jobs falling, and planning this event has kind of fallen to the wayside. But even if we can't have our own event on the 17th, we are actually going to have one here locally, so that people, within this community can find out things that they can do to be active within this community. So follow Toledo Abortion Toledo Abortion Center escorts on Facebook. We are also on Twitter and Instagram, but we are most active on Facebook. That's where we're going to post the majority of our stuff and our events. So keep an eye on that. Also follow the Aggie Fund on all the socials. We are on Facebook. We are on Twitter. We are on Instagram, the Agnes Reynolds Jackson Fund. You can see our link tree there. Toledo Abortion Center Escorts also has a link tree. Lots of resources in both of those. And Doug, I'll make sure that you have that link so that you can post it there. But this fight is not over. It's devastating right now, but it goes on. We're not done. We will be out there, and we will definitely do everything we can to make sure that people can access the abortion that they need, the abortion care that they need.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time, and I really appreciate it. And yeah, I will be very supportive of whatever actions people are taking, because this is going to affect everybody, not just women.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this case is going to, we know how cases work. They're going, they refer to other cases to make their current case. So this is going to trickle into so many different things. They're coming after contraception. They're coming after gay marriage. We already see what they're doing to trans rights in Ohio. It's just going to be a huge trickle down effect.
Thank you for listening. For information about the topics in this episode, please visit the episode page at glasscityhumanist.show. Glass City Humanist is an outreach of the Secular Humanists of Western Lake Erie and is supported in part by a grant by the American Humanist Association. The AHA can be reached at americanhumanist.org. SHoWLE can be reached at humanists.wle.org. Glass City Humanist is hosted, written, and produced by Douglas Berger, and he is solely responsible for the content. Our theme music is Glass City Jam, composed using the Amplify Studio. See you next time.